January 1945, settled hard over the Alsace plain. As American infantry dug frozen positions along hedgerows and woods, believing the German winter offensive had spent itself, unaware that exhausted lines masked gathering forces preparing one more violent attempt to break through. Snow muffled sound and movement, turning fields into white traps where visibility vanished quickly, while soldiers of the 3rd Infantry Division struggled to hold a thin defensive ribbon stretched across villages whose names meant little, yet whose loss threatened wider collapse. The Colmar pocket loomed as an unresolved danger, a stubborn German salient anchored against the Rhine, allowing enemy artillery and counterattacks to harass Allied advances, complicating supply routes and morale during a winter campaign already defined by fatigue and cold. American commanders believed pressure would soon squeeze the pocket shut, but German mountain troops, hardened and desperate, prepared local counteroffensives designed to exploit thin American manpower, hoping surprise and aggression might reclaim initiative lost months earlier along the frozen front. Frontline units rotated rarely, sleep came in fragments, and frostbite rivaled bullets as a constant threat, while young replacements arrived straight from training, untested and frightened, learning quickly that winter warfare punished hesitation as cruelly as mistakes, without mercy, ever. By late January, German intelligence identified weak seams near Holtzwihr, a small village shielding access routes, and assembled infantry with armored support, betting that concentrated force against one company could rupture the American line and force withdrawal during bitter fighting. Company B of the 5th Infantry occupied exposed ground near woods and fields, their numbers already thinned by casualties, relying on foxholes scraped into frozen earth and mutual trust built under weeks of relentless shelling from German artillery fire daily. Among them stood a slight 19-year-old platoon leader, Audie Murphy, outwardly unremarkable, carrying the quiet focus of someone raised poor and responsible early, whose calm under pressure had already marked him as different within his exhausted rifle company. The morning of January 26th dawned gray and brittle, with mist clinging low, reducing sight lines and amplifying uncertainty, as German preparatory fire hinted that the quiet was deceptive, and that an assault was imminent against American positions near Holtzwihr. Orders emphasized holding ground at all costs, since retreat risked unraveling adjacent units. Yet commanders understood the fragility of morale, knowing that one breakthrough could cascade rapidly across the winter front under relentless pressure from concentrated German attacks, artillery, armor. For the soldiers waiting in foxholes, history felt distant and abstract, replaced by immediate sensations of cold, hunger, and fear, while the landscape ahead seemed poised to erupt, demanding decisions that would define survival within minutes under sudden enemy assault. Unknown to German planners, this fragile sector concealed an improbable fulcrum, a convergence of terrain, timing, and individual resolve, where the coming assault would meet resistance far exceeding expectations, altering the fate of the Alsace front during one extraordinary hour. Audie Murphy was born into grinding poverty in rural Texas, where cotton fields and sharecropper shacks shaped a childhood defined by hunger, responsibility, and resilience, forcing a small, quiet boy to hunt rabbits with borrowed rifles to feed siblings after his father vanished. His mother's early death deepened that burden, leaving Audie effectively raising younger brothers and sisters, learning discipline, patience, and self-reliance long before adolescence. Traits forged by necessity rather than ideology, which later translated seamlessly into military endurance under wartime pressures. When war came, he lied about his age to enlist, rejected repeatedly for his slight frame and youth, yet persisting with quiet determination until the army accepted him, underestimating how hardship had already trained him for combat in Europe ahead. Basic training introduced structure rather than fear, as weapons drill, marksmanship, and discipline felt familiar to a boy who had hunted daily, while his calm demeanor under stress impressed instructors who saw potential, masked by modest silence and humility enduring. Assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division, Murphy crossed into combat hardened by responsibility rather than bravado, learning quickly that leadership meant example, not volume, and that survival depended on awareness, cooperation, and relentless attention to terrain under fire always present. Early campaigns in Sicily and Italy tested him brutally, exposing Murphy to artillery ambush and loss. Yet each engagement refined his instincts, sharpening aggression, timing, and restraint, forging a soldier who reacted decisively while others froze under chaos repeatedly in battle. By France, Murphy had accumulated wounds, decorations, and experience beyond his years, rising to leadership through necessity rather than ambition, carrying the weight of men's lives with a seriousness that belied his youth and slight stature amid constant danger daily. Comrades remembered his quiet voice, steady eyes, and refusal to seek cover when others needed direction. Qualities rooted not in fearlessness but in acceptance. That duty mattered more than survival when responsibility was placed upon him during intense combat moments. Murphy studied terrain obsessively, understanding fields, woods, and villages as living maps, using angles, elevation, and timing instinctively, a mental discipline developed through hunting and reinforced by months of combat against adaptive, experienced enemies across Europe, relentlessly advancing fronts daily. Unlike many heroes, he never spoke of glory, focusing instead on protecting his men. A mindset born from childhood caretaking and loss, where survival was communal and sacrifice was assumed rather than celebrated under harsh realities of war daily endured. As winter closed in on Alsace, Murphy's journey converged toward a defining moment, where upbringing, training, and accumulated instinct would intersect under impossible pressure, demanding action beyond orders and testing the limits of human resolve during historic combat events unfolding. The soldier who stepped into that frozen field was not created in an hour, but shaped slowly by hunger, loss, discipline, and responsibility, proving that extraordinary battlefield courage often grows from ordinary suffering endured quietly across childhood years before war. The Colmar pocket lay along the Rhine's western bank, a stubborn German-held salient that mocked Allied progress, anchoring enemy artillery observation and threatening supply routes through Alsace during a winter when momentum mattered as much as manpower across exhausted fronts. For German commanders, the pocket represented honor and leverage, a foothold on French soil maintained despite retreat elsewhere, preserving the illusion of control while buying time for regrouping forces facing overwhelming Allied numbers pressing from multiple directions relentlessly. For Allied planners, the pocket was an exposed dagger, endangering crossings and delaying the final push into Germany, forcing divisions already battered by Ardennes, fighting to commit again under brutal conditions of snow, ice, and limited mobility daily endured. Alsace in January became a frozen labyrinth, fields hardened like stone forests stripped bare, villages reduced to firing points where sound carried endlessly, and movement invited instant artillery response, making every advance costly, measured in blood and frostbite combined. Temperatures plunged well below freezing, turning weapons unreliable and men brittle, while white landscapes erased cover and amplified danger, demanding discipline, patience, and adaptability from units already depleted and fatigued by months of continuous campaigning across Europe. The Germans reinforced the pocket with mountain troops and armor, veterans accustomed to harsh terrain, believing defensive ground and weather could equalize disparities in air power and numbers, trusting cold discipline and entrenched positions to blunt Allied assaults. American and French units faced complex coordination challenges, integrating inexperienced replacements with veterans while navigating minefields and overlapping fire zones, knowing delays favored defenders and that every failed probe cost irreplaceable winter casualties. Artillery dominated the pocket's rhythm, guns firing blindly through snow squalls guided by sound and pre-planned coordinates, shattering villages repeatedly until maps became abstractions and landmarks existed only in memory or shattered stone foundations. Control of small hamlets like Holtzwihr carried outsized importance, serving as anchors for defensive lines and observation posts, where losing a few hundred yards could unravel sectors and expose flanks to enfilading fire immediately threatening collapse. Logistics strained constantly, as frozen roads slowed ammunition, food, and medical evacuation, forcing soldiers to fight hungry, cold, and exhausted, knowing relief depended on breaking the pocket rather than enduring another stagnant winter stalemate. Strategically, the pocket's elimination promised psychological victory, signaling that no German foothold in France was safe, restoring Allied confidence after recent setbacks and demonstrating relentless pressure regardless of season or suffering imposed. Thus, the frozen ground mattered deeply, becoming a crucible where strategy, weather, and will converged, setting conditions for acts of desperate courage and sacrifice that would decide not just a line on a map, but the war's accelerating conclusion. Dawn at Holtzwihr arrived muted and gray, snow muffling sound while frost clung to weapons and eyelashes. As Company B of the 5th Temp, infantry held shallow positions that offered little protection against an enemy already probing with methodical intent. The men sensed pressure before seeing it, An unease carried by distant engine noise and sporadic mortar rounds, signaling that German forces were massing deliberately rather than retreating, choosing this frozen morning to test whether the American line would finally break. Company B was under strength, reduced by weeks of attrition and sickness, with replacements unfamiliar with terrain and leadership stretched thin, forcing squads to cover wide intervals that invited penetration if attacked with speed and coordination. Holtzwihr itself was barely a village now. Shattered houses and leafless trees marking former streets, offering limited cover that drew artillery fire repeatedly, making any fixed position temporary and any movement across open ground dangerously exposed. As visibility improved slightly, German infantry emerged cautiously, white camouflage blending into snow, supported by armored vehicles advancing with confidence born from numerical superiority and recent intelligence suggesting American resistance here was brittle. The first exchanges were brutal and close, machine gun bursts cutting through silence while shells slammed into frozen earth, sending shards of ice and soil into foxholes where men crouched, struggling to reload with numb fingers. Radio reports confirmed the worst. Enemy strength far exceeded expectations, with estimates rising toward 200 soldiers supported by tanks, a force capable of encirclement that threatened to annihilate Company B within hours if unchecked. Orders came quickly and grimly. Elements were to withdraw to secondary positions to avoid being overrun, a tactical retreat meant to preserve lives but risking loss of ground critical to holding the sector's fragile alignment. Under fire, withdrawal became chaos, men dragging wounded comrades while smoke and snow reduced visibility. German pressure intensifying as they sensed opportunity, exploiting gaps with disciplined aggression honed on the Eastern Front. One platoon was nearly cut off, pinned by advancing infantry and tank fire, leaving little room for maneuver, while command struggled to maintain coherence amid broken communications and mounting casualties accumulating across the line. Amid this unraveling, a single tank destroyer burned near the road, its crew evacuated and ammunition cooking off ominously, becoming both hazard and potential shield within a landscape stripped of options for survival. Company B stood at the brink of destruction. A moment where doctrine failed and improvisation would decide fate, as one soldier prepared to act in a way that defied expectation, altering the morning's trajectory irrevocably. Orders to pull back crackled through radios, urgent and final, as Company B began disengaging under fire, leaving behind fields swept by machine guns while German armor pressed forward, forcing the choice between survival through retreat or sacrifice through resistance. Lieutenant Murphy understood the meaning instantly. Withdrawal meant abandoning wounded ground and exposing retreating men, and he saw how quickly the enemy advance could turn organized movement into panic if no one slowed their momentum under relentless fire that followed. Murphy ordered his men to fall back in bounds, his voice steady despite chaos, prioritizing lives over ground while calculating the narrow window available before German infantry and tanks would fully exploit the collapsing American flank and seal it completely. As squads withdrew through smoke and snow, Murphy assessed terrain rapidly, noting the burning M10 tank destroyer near the road, recognizing its height and mounted machine gun offered a fleeting chance to delay the assault despite overwhelming odds ahead alone. The decision carried lethal risk. The vehicle was already aflame and loaded with ammunition, yet retreat would expose his company's backs. And Murphy weighed his own life against dozens moving through open ground under direct enemy fire and pressure now. He shouted final instructions, directing artillery onto his position once friendly forces cleared, a calculation that demanded precision and nerve, knowing any error would mean his death without hesitation or rescue from advancing German formations closing rapidly nearby now alone. Climbing onto the burning tank destroyer, Murphy ignored exploding ammunition beneath him, gripping the .50 caliber machine gun, transforming wreckage into a fortress while German soldiers advanced, believing resistance had collapsed as planned withdrawal continued behind his stand firm there. This moment was not impulse but responsibility, forged by months of combat and loss. Understanding leadership sometimes meant isolation, choosing to absorb violence personally so others might escape annihilation during collapsing defensive lines in frozen Alsace winter that morning now. Murphy's choice bought time measured in minutes, yet those minutes mattered immensely, allowing battered platoons to regroup, wounded men to be carried back, and artillery coordination to stabilize the faltering defense against overwhelming German pressure that morning sector here now. German commanders misread the pause, assuming heavier American resistance ahead, as Murphy's solitary stand projected the illusion of strength, slowing their tempo and disrupting coordination at a critical juncture during winter offensive operations near Holtzwihr village, on that day now. Within retreat lay survival, yet within staying lay purpose. Murphy accepted both truths simultaneously, embracing the burden of decision without expectation of glory. Only the necessity to hold long enough for comrades escaping danger through smoke and fire now there. That decision defined the battle's hinge point, a solitary figure choosing delay over safety, transforming retreat into resistance, and setting conditions for a defense that would otherwise have disintegrated under pressure from mass German attack that cold morning there then. Flames licked the M10's hull as Murphy climbed higher, the metal radiating heat and danger, while smoke drifted across frozen fields, turning the disabled destroyer into an accidental fortress whose elevation commanded the road and forced approaching German infantry to hesitate under unexpected fire. Below his boots ammunition cooked off violently, each pop echoing like a countdown, yet Murphy remained steady, bracing the .50 caliber machine gun and sighting targets through smoke, transforming chaos into controlled violence aimed precisely at advancing figures across the field ahead. The burning vehicle should have driven him away, but instead it anchored him, providing armor remnants and height, while German riflemen advancing cautiously could not comprehend alone. American choosing a flaming wreck as his final defensive position amid collapsing winter lines. Murphy's vantage allowed observation and dominance, every burst sweeping tree lines and ditches, disrupting formations and sowing confusion, as German troops reported encountering heavy resistance. Unaware a single exhausted soldier commanded their attention from the wreckage alone that morning under fire. The .50 caliber roared relentlessly, its recoil biting into Murphy's shoulders, while spent casings piled around his feet, each belt feeding minutes of survival, trading noise and flame for precious time purchased with unbearable exposure to enemy fire alone there. German bullets cracked past his position, splintering metal and earth, yet the elevation denied easy approach, forcing attackers into open ground, where Murphy's fire cut lanes through ranks that expected withdrawal rather than defiant resistance from a burning machine above. Smoke masked his silhouette intermittently, granting brief invisibility, then revealing him again in flame, a terrible rhythm that amplified danger, as every second atop the tank risked detonation while he continued firing without pause amid chaos below him there now. The Rex radio allowed Murphy to call artillery, coordinates delivered calmly, inviting shells onto his own position, a calculated gamble where danger multiplied, yet explosions beyond slowed armor and pinned infantry unable to advance decisively across frozen approaches nearby. From German perspectives, the tank destroyer seemed manned by a crew, its sustained fire contradicting expectations, reinforcing reports of stubborn defense, while Murphy's solitary presence bent perception and magnified his impact far beyond physical numbers during that brutal winter battle. The burning machine became an extension of Murphy himself, heat and noise merging with resolve, as fear receded behind duty and the battlefield reorganized around one fixed point of resistance that refused to collapse under pressure that morning there now. Minutes stretched endlessly atop the wreck, each heartbeat counted, while the tank continued burning beneath him, creating a paradox of shelter and threat, a place where survival depended on refusing to descend despite mounting peril from encircling forces nearby then. When ammunition finally dwindled and strength faded, the fortress had served its purpose, buying irreplaceable time, breaking momentum, and proving that terrain and courage, even improvised, could halt forces vastly superior in number during that decisive hour alone there then. German infantry advanced cautiously across frozen fields, believing resistance was collapsing, yet sustained machine gun fire erupted continuously, pinning formations and shattering momentum, as officers struggled to identify positions, unable to accept that one American alone anchored the defense during that brutal winter assault. Murphy maintained relentless fire, sweeping hedgerows and ditches methodically, while German soldiers attempted flanking movements repeatedly, only to be cut down in exposed ground, their advance dissolving under unexpected resistance sustained far longer than doctrine predicted by experienced mountain troops that day. Artillery support amplified the stand, shells crashing ahead and behind Murphy's position, confusing attackers and severing coordination, as German commanders hesitated, suspecting traps. unable to reconcile maps with reality shaped by accurate fire called onto friendly lines from unseen observers nearby. German losses mounted steadily, bodies marking advance routes, morale eroding as repeated assaults failed, while reports filtered rearward describing an impossible defense. Exaggeration dismissed initially, then feared as minutes stretched into an hour without breakthrough despite overwhelming numerical superiority expected. Murphy endured exposure and exhaustion, hands numb and ears ringing, yet discipline held, every burst calculated to disrupt leadership and movement. Proving endurance itself became a weapon, slowing attackers psychologically as much as physically during that prolonged defensive stand alone. German tank crews attempted cautious probing, but artillery bursts and machine gun fire discouraged commitment, forcing armor to pause, while infantry hesitated without support, the combined arms attack unraveling against resistance that refused to yield under relentless observation from above. Time favored Murphy, each delayed minute allowing American units to reorganize, while German urgency increased dangerously, prompting reckless pushes that exposed men further, transforming numerical advantage into liability under concentrated defensive fire during the frozen Alsace battle conditions that morning. Survivors later recalled disbelief, describing fire intensity inconsistent with reality, convinced multiple defenders operated unseen. Their shock rooted in expectation collapse, when training assumptions failed against improvisation, resolve, and lethal efficiency combined unexpectedly from a single position on that field. German commanders ordered renewed assaults, driven by pride and urgency, yet cohesion faltered. Communications fractured and casualties deepened as the defense continued defying probability, reshaping battlefield dynamics through stubborn resistance alone for an exhausting hour under relentless winter fire conditions. Murphy's endurance bordered on the unimaginable. Wounds untreated and senses overloaded, yet command of terrain persisted, turning exposure into dominance and fear into fuel, sustaining defense through sheer refusal to abandon position despite overwhelming enemy pressure from all sides then. The psychological toll on attackers proved decisive. Uncertainty magnified losses, confidence eroded rapidly, and initiative slipped away, as belief in superiority collapsed against evidence of determined resistance that would not break under sustained fire from a solitary American defender there. By the time attacks subsided, German forces withdrew shaken, leaving ground littered with casualties, while Murphy descended exhausted, his stand having halted momentum saved comrades, and demonstrated how singular endurance could shape battle outcomes against impossible odds that winter morning. German after-action reports later described confusion, stalled assaults, and inexplicable resistance, noting losses inconsistent with expected opposition as officers questioned maps and intelligence, recording disbelief that a single American position delayed battalion momentum and fractured coordinated advances during critical winter operations. Captured documents revealed commanders initially assumed hidden strongpoints or concealed units, revising estimates upward repeatedly, because casualty figures contradicted reality, demonstrating how tactical doctrine failed when assumptions met improvised defense. Relentless accuracy and psychological pressure applied continuously under winter battlefield conditions. German unit diaries referenced halted timetables, ammunition depletion, and rising fear, as repeated orders produced diminishing returns, highlighting erosion of command confidence when numerical superiority collapsed against stubborn resistance, exposing vulnerabilities rarely admitted in official narratives from frontline mountain formations. Interrogations conducted weeks later revealed lingering astonishment, soldiers insisting enemy numbers were underestimated drastically because sustained fire patterns suggested platoon strength, illustrating how perception shaped decisions, delaying reinforcement requests, and compounding tactical paralysis amid deteriorating battlefield clarity during fast-moving engagements. German communications logs recorded frantic radio traffic, requests for artillery reassessment, and aborted maneuvers, as uncertainty magnified threat perception, proving morale damage can outweigh material losses, especially when resistance contradicts every expectation drilled through years of training by seasoned units. Post-war analyses by German historians acknowledged breakdowns in initiative, noting hesitation cascaded downward, freezing assaults mid-movement, while leadership misread isolated resistance as larger formations, an error amplified by terrain, weather, and unexpected American artillery coordination during Alsace fighting period. Reports emphasized psychological shock, describing attackers convinced they faced elite defenders, revealing how belief shaped outcomes, as fear slowed advances, disrupted spacing, and undermined aggression, ultimately forcing withdrawal despite remaining strength and available reserves nearby within supporting battalions then present. German tactical manuals later cited the engagement obliquely, warning against underestimating isolated fire points, acknowledging that concentrated discipline and accurate support could negate numbers. A lesson learned painfully through unexpected losses suffered during that hour by veteran units on frozen ground. Surviving officers wrote privately of embarrassment, struggling to explain failure upward, as cultural emphasis on honor intensified shame, reinforcing silence within records, while the incident quietly informed revisions to training assumptions regarding defensive tenacity against determined individuals under pressure conditions. Intelligence summaries compiled afterward acknowledged miscalculation, stating resistance exceeded expectations dramatically, affecting operational tempo, illustrating how singular acts could ripple outward, disrupting plans built upon assumptions of predictable enemy collapse during late winter operations along contested sectors in Alsace front. The event underscored fragility within offensive doctrine, where momentum depended upon expectation not certainty, and once surprise intervened, cohesion faltered, demonstrating that psychological dominance can unravel numerical advantage faster than physical destruction alone under sustained fire from unexpected sources nearby. From the German perspective, the stand became a cautionary memory, rarely publicized, yet quietly studied, reminding commanders that war punishes assumptions ruthlessly, and that resolve, skill, and timing can overturn calculations derived from strength alone in close combat contexts repeatedly. When the smoke finally lifted over Holtzwihr, the battlefield revealed chaos and devastation with overturned equipment, burned-out vehicles, and scattered German bodies, yet Audie Murphy remained alive atop the burning M10, his uniform scorched, his hands blistered, still clutching the .50 caliber machine gun he had wielded relentlessly. Company B soldiers, returning cautiously to assess the aftermath, found Murphy alert, issuing calm instructions, checking for wounded comrades, and coordinating artillery fire despite exhaustion, demonstrating the presence of mind that had preserved his life and prevented a total collapse of the American defensive line against overwhelming enemy forces. Word of Murphy's actions spread rapidly up the chain of command, with officers astonished that a single 19-year-old had held off 250 German troops and 6 tanks for over an hour, altering the tactical outcome and providing a critical window for the main force to regroup and stabilize their positions. Military historians later examined reports, casualty counts, and artillery logs, confirming Murphy's extraordinary kill and suppression record, which included 50 confirmed enemy casualties and numerous wounded, establishing his defensive stand as one of the most documented, extraordinary, and consequential acts of individual heroism in World War II. Murphy himself downplayed personal glory, crediting his unit, artillery support, and sheer instinct for survival, revealing a humility that contrasted with the extraordinary magnitude of his achievement, reflecting a soldier whose courage was inseparable from duty, loyalty, and an acute understanding of battlefield necessity under extreme circumstances. Within weeks, senior officers initiated the process to recognize Murphy's heroism formally, compiling reports, eyewitness statements, and photographic evidence to support a Medal of Honor nomination, ensuring that military bureaucracy, meticulous documentation, and first-hand testimony captured the singular nature of his stand for posterity. The Medal of Honor citation highlighted Murphy's exceptional courage, decisive action, and leadership, emphasizing how one soldier's initiative preserved a key sector, disrupted enemy momentum, and embodied the highest standards of gallantry, setting a benchmark for valor recognized by both contemporary and future generations of American soldiers. Survivors of Company B recounted the day repeatedly, describing not just the firepower but Murphy's unwavering composure under direct threat, noting how he moved between positions, assessed targets, and coordinated support, reinforcing that heroism encompassed both physical endurance and tactical intelligence under unparalleled stress. News of Murphy's achievement reached civilian America, inspiring morale across the country and cementing his status as a symbol of youthful bravery, determination, and the American fighting spirit, demonstrating how a single individual could profoundly influence both military operations and public perception during wartime. Subsequent military studies cited Murphy's stand in leadership manuals, tactical briefings, and historical analyses, showing that audacity, initiative, and the willingness to assume extreme risk could decisively shape engagements, influencing training doctrines for small-unit defensive actions in future conflicts. Murphy's post-war life reflected the lasting impact of that hour at Holtzwihr, as he became a vocal advocate for veterans, openly discussing trauma, resilience, and the human cost of heroism, showing that recognition extended beyond medals to responsibility and education about the consequences of combat. In the final analysis, the battlefield at Holtzwihr became a testament to courage, endurance, and the extraordinary potential of an individual, where survival, recognition, and historical memory converged, ensuring that Audie Murphy's singular act of valor would endure as an iconic moment in World War II history. After the guns fell silent and the snow of Alsace melted into spring, Audie Murphy returned home carrying not just medals but an invisible burden, the lingering echoes of Holtzwihr embedding themselves in memory, a reminder that heroism often comes with a profound personal cost few can understand or endure fully. Murphy struggled with nightmares, flashbacks, and insomnia, symptoms of what modern psychology identifies as post-traumatic stress disorder, demonstrating that valor in battle did not immunize a soldier from the lasting mental scars of combat, and that surviving extraordinary events could be as challenging as confronting them in the moment. Despite public accolades, Murphy often felt alienated from ordinary life, unable to reconcile the horrors witnessed with civilian routines, illustrating how the transition from legendary wartime figure to everyday citizen can exacerbate trauma and create an internal conflict between societal admiration and personal suffering. He became a vocal advocate for fellow veterans, speaking openly about mental health struggles, challenging the stigma surrounding trauma, and insisting that courage included seeking help, not merely enduring silently, thereby transforming personal pain into a broader mission to protect and support those who served. Hollywood recognized Murphy's story, leading to films that both glorified his battlefield exploits and subtly highlighted the human cost of heroism, providing a medium through which audiences could comprehend the duality of valor and vulnerability that defined his life long after World War II ended. Murphy's writing, speeches, and interviews frequently reflected on the thin line between life and death at Holtzwihr, emphasizing that bravery was inseparable from fear, calculation, and moral responsibility, illustrating that heroism is not instinct alone, but a deliberate choice made in the face of overwhelming odds. Through decades of public service, Murphy underscored the importance of remembrance and historical accuracy, ensuring that stories of combat valor included lessons about humanity, resilience, and the ethical complexities of war, rather than presenting sanitized or purely heroic narratives that ignore the psychological toll endured by soldiers. He also navigated the tension between national hero status and private grief, understanding that recognition cannot erase trauma but can validate sacrifice, encourage societal support, and foster a culture that values both courage and the ongoing welfare of those who risk everything in defense of others. Veteran organizations credited Murphy with bringing attention to underreported struggles, demonstrating that one individual's platform could shift public perception, influence policy, and create awareness about mental health, thereby extending the impact of battlefield heroism into social responsibility and national consciousness. Murphy's later years reflected a commitment to mentorship, as he guided younger soldiers, sharing tactical wisdom while emphasizing mental resilience, the importance of teamwork, and the necessity of balancing duty with self-care, showing that the legacy of combat extends far beyond medals and military accolades. Historians examining Holtzwihr consistently cite Murphy's actions as not only tactically decisive, but emblematic of the personal costs associated with extraordinary valor, emphasizing that understanding heroism requires integrating battlefield achievements with the subsequent human consequences of exposure to extreme danger. Ultimately, Audie Murphy's life after Holtzwihr exemplifies the intersection of legacy, trauma, and enduring courage, showing that true heroism encompasses both battlefield action and the ongoing struggle to live, heal, and advocate for others, reminding future generations that the cost of saving lives often continues long after the fighting ends.